Yes, hello once again. Welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, we have been off the air for a couple of weeks, just taking a well-earned rest after we posted all 6 episodes from this year's 2024 Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show. But we're back again to show you more of those old vintage classics. Now, you may remember as we were compiling all of the episodes from this year's Telford show that we did single out 1 or 2 very classy bikes that we were going to take a look at later after we were finished with the Telford footage. But we're going to feature the first of those machines right now. So let's get straight into it and take a look at this American-made 1999 ATK 250.
Okay, so as I said, we did mention when we were done with all of the episodes from this year's Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show that we would pick out 1 or 2 of the rarer and more interesting bikes to do a more in-depth feature on. And this bike here is the first on the list, and this machine that we're looking at here is a 1999 American-made ATK 250 two-stroker, and as interesting and rare bikes go, this example here is certainly up there with some of the best of them. So on the day that these pictures were taken, the bike was tucked away at the back of the D&G Vintage Restoration Stand, and actually if you were just walking past, browsing, looking at all the bikes, then the chances are you'd probably not even notice this bike was in the hall. But this is when my 6'4" height came in quite handy for a change, because the first thing that really caught my eye was the big ATK graphics that were stamped on the radiator scoops. And when I eventually made my way through the other machines that were on display, young Aaron Gledhill of D&G Vintage Restorations very kindly pulled the bike out into the passageway so that we could get a much better look at it. Now, ATK Motorcycles, as you're probably aware, was initially set up by Austrian-born engineer Horst Lietner, who, although he did some great work on motorcycles in his native Austria, Lietner, of course, had a much bigger and long-term vision for his skills, and so it was then he uprooted his entire family and moved them to the USA. And in his first few years in the States, he was then building and designing frames to take the Honda XR 350 engine. And when the Austrian-based Puch manufacturer learned about the quality and the design of Leitner's frames, then they signed him up almost immediately, and they promised him everything he needed to design and build a completely brand new off-road bike, which of course would include access to the big Rotax 4-stroke motors. And so Lietner did go on to build frames using these big Rotax 560 and 605cc 4-stroke engines, and this example here is Andy Sharp's 1987 560, which is a UK spec of that year's model. But Lietner certainly designed some innovative ideas into these bikes, like his anti-chain torque system that had a pulley here on the top of the swing arm and one on the bottom, which was originally titled his anti-tension kitten and tribe, or ATK for short, which of course is where the name of ATK originated. But this chain tensioning anti-torque system was streets ahead in off-road motorcycle design for its time, and this was just one of the many innovations that the great Lietner came up with. And just before we get back to our featured bike, those big 4-stroke Rotax thumpers that Lietner designed in his early years of the 1980s certainly sold in their thousands across the USA, and they certainly weren't cheap at an average price of between $7,000 and $10,000. So if you owned an ATK around that time, then you were certainly treated like a bit of a celebrity when you turned up at your local motocross track. But as we make our way back to our featured bike, which is one of the later ATKs, this is a 1999 bike, and this one here has a liquid-cooled Rotax two-stroke motor, as opposed to Lietner's earlier big four-stroke thumpers. But it's supplied by Rotax as usual, and it's certainly a tight, compact little unit, and a world away from those big, heavy four-bangers that Lietner designed in his earlier years. So beginning with the bike's chassis, which as you can see is a very light tubular steel frame with a square box section alloy swing arm at the rear. But the combination of this light frame and that compact Rotax two-stroke engine certainly made this a super quick and flickable little bike. Now our ATK's power plant, which is actually a 250, but I'm sure that this model was titled the 257 for reasons best known to yourself, because I don't actually have a clue as to why it was called a 257, but essentially it's still a Rotax 250 two-stroke, which of course is liquid cooled. And for all of you boffins out there who love your specifications and dimensions, it has a bore of 67.5 millimeters and a stroke of 69.8 millimeters. Now they say it's also fitted with a counterbalance power valve, and to keep your left foot busy, it also has a 6-speed wide ratio gearbox, just to keep that two-stroke Rotax engine buzzing along. Now to feed this little compact Rotax engine with all of its fuel, it was a 38mm Mikuni TMX carburetor, and of course a reed valve block intake, although it's certainly not that easy to see the carburetor tucked away behind all of this plastic ATK bodywork. Although the plastic airbox at the back of the carb had a foam type filter that you could simply remove, wash and clean it, and then oil and reuse it. And here on the engine's clutch side, it was a simple wet oil-cooled multi-plate kind of clutch that was cable operated and not hydraulic, as you'd maybe expect from a bike of the 1990s. And just in front of the clutch there you can see the water pump for the motor's liquid cooling system. And here on the flip side of the 250 engine, it was an SEM CDI electronic ignition that provided all of the sparks to ignite that fuel air mixture that was pumped into the cylinder by that Mikuni carburetor. And with this motor being a super reliable Rotax engine, it was usually one or just two kicks of that Kickstarter to spark it into life. But no question, when this Rotax motor got going, it was blindingly quick, and that's the reason that this engine here was also put to good use on racing go-karts as well way back in the day. So with regards to the cooling system on our 250 ATK, it was a pair of small vertical radiators that were used to cool all of the liquid that was being pumped around the engine. And it was one here at either side of the frame's front down tube, with all of the topping up and refilling done on this right hand side. Now, to direct that oncoming air into the rads, these quite handy air scoops helped direct that cooling air to where it was required, right into the heart of those twin cooling towers. So our ATK's exhaust expansion chamber, as you can see, is still in quite good condition, considering that this is a 25-year-old machine, and this part here may even just be a replacement, because I'm not actually sure if this is original or not, but it's certainly got some kind of writing stamped on it there. I think it's Dino Sport or something similar to that stamped on the pipe. But of course it then led to this substantial alloy tailpipe here at the back of the bike, which once again could be a recent replacement, but nevertheless it all still looks correct and proper for a bike from the last year of the 1990s. Okay, so moving on to the front end of our ATK, and up here at the business end it was a pair of conventional Italian-made Paoli 46mm forks, which was one of the internal cartridge type of suspension systems. And these Paolis, I think, had just over 11 inches of travel for the rider to play around with here at the front end. Now, they did have some scope for adjusting to the rebound and damping by moving the clickers here at the top of each fork leg, but these 46mm suspension units were certainly strong and quite beefy for just a 250 two-stroker, and these forks are usually more associated to a much bigger machine, but they certainly did work well on our Horst Lietner racer. And again, to provide an anchor to stop or slow our 250 ATK in full flight, it was more Italian-based parts here with this twin piston Brembo hydraulic setup here at the front, and I think it was a 260mm or maybe a 10-inch steel brake disc there as well. But these Brembo stoppers were certainly very good quality, and these brakes are still being used on many of the big road bikes manufactured today. And here at the rear wheel, it was yet another Italian single pot Brembo brake, not as powerful of course as that twin cylinder one at the front brake, but it certainly didn't have to be, because as you know, most of the bike's stopping power and weight are usually transferred to the front wheel during braking. But again, more good quality components on our American Beauty. And while we're still here at the back of the bike now, both this rear and of course that front wheel as well are still the original alloy DID rims that were made back in 1999. And thankfully Aaron's not had that temptation to cover these in hideous black paint, which seems to be the norm on classic dirt bikes these days. And as we move on to the bike's rear suspension, we take a look at the single rear monoshock, which is actually a good quality Öhlins piggyback unit that you can see, and it's mounted to this left hand side of the bike's swing arm, and this particular design was yet another Horst Lietner innovation, which he designed purely with racing the bike in mind. And his thinking was that if he mounted one single unit onto one side of the swing arm, then it would be a lot easier and quicker to change it during a racing situation, rather than having it mounted in the centre of the swing arm, where it would be harder to access with regards detaching linkages and other bits and pieces to remove it. But our 250 ATK's swing arm was again just a simple, straightforward box type alloy construction that was both light and very strong, considering that it was made of much softer alloy and not made of steel. But this was all done purely to keep the overall weight of the bike to a decent level, which, as I remember, I think the overall weight was 230 pounds, which of course was minus any fuel in the bike's fuel tank. So still a decent weight, even for a two-stroke 250. And also attached to the swing arm, we have this nicely made alloy chain guide here at the bottom, which is quite a nice touch on the bike. And I don't actually know if this is an original part from 99, but nevertheless, it does add a little bit of quality to this very rare American motorcycle. Now on this side, you can see the slave cylinder and alloy rear brake lever are mounted in the conventional fashion on our 99 ATK, with that Brembo slave cylinder in the vertical position and the rear brake lever facing forward. Although in some of Lietner's earlier designs like this 1989 250, you can see that he also designed the rear brake lever facing backwards, which was all done just in case the rider dropped the bike onto its side. Then Lietner thought it would be less likely to bend or even break it in a race situation if it hit a hard obstacle. So as you can gather, Lietner was certainly switched on when it came to these kind of bright ideas. And of course, one of those bright, radical ideas was to mount the bike's rear disc brake onto the primary drive sprocket, which was all part of Lietner's anti-torque tensioning system, or his anti-tension Kettingen tribe, as it was then known. But how well it all worked out on the track, I don't actually know. So you might be better to just ask somebody who actually rode an ATK like this back in the day. But this was certainly radical and ingenious for its time. Now, although you can't really see it in this particular shot, the bike's fuel tank was sited in between those two radiators and just in front of that front part of the bike's seat. And again, a very big fuel tank for a 250, because I think this tank here held just over 3 gallons or 11 litres of pre-mixed fuel in this plastic construction. So it was more than enough gas for even the longest of motocross races. And again, it was a conventional type of motocross seat on our Rotax ATK bike, with the front portion of the seat going up and over the top of the bike's fuel tank, just to enable the rider to shift his weight from the centre to the front of the machine, so that he can help the bike make sharper and quicker turns and just balance it a little bit better with more weight over that front wheel. Now, I never really did find out whether this bike's been fully restored by Aaron and his team at D&G Vintage Restorations, or indeed if this bike here is still in its original stock configuration. But parts, including these plastics and even their graphics, are still in fantastic condition for a 25 plus year old machine. And even if these are not the originals from 1999, it can't be that easy to obtain new old stock plastics and parts for these older ATKs. But as we move along onto the pilot seat, we have what I assume is the original handlebars there, with their alloy levers and of course the throttle gasser there, just to try and help keep all those ponies waiting to be unleashed from that Rotax engine and keep them under control. Now, also on this left hand side, you may have spotted that little red engine kill button there, which is a quite handy feature to have on a rare motocrosser such as this, just in case there is any problems with that Rotax engine and it needs to be shut down in a hurry. But certainly both the alloy ball end levers are correct for this bike and for its year of manufacture, and I expect that that clutch cable as well is more than likely a replacement, because let's face it, you're never going to find a bike at this age with its original control cables, and you'd certainly not want to put this bike onto the track with 25-year-old control cables intact. Although for me, personally speaking, this is certainly the first ATK that I've actually seen with this design of Rotax two-stroke engine, because as you know, there is quite a few of these old Rotaxes still going around with the older two-stroke engines. You know, the same ones that they used in the old Can-Am bikes back in the day of the 1980s, but the word is that very few of these 257s were actually made, and figures of only around 100 have been bandied about, but this is certainly a rare machine, and even rarer to see one here in the UK, as almost all of them were built and sold across the USA, naturally because this was an American designed and built machine. And I suppose if there were so few of this model of ATK actually made, then who knows just how many of them are now still going around. But I'll wager that this is probably the only one of this model in the UK. So again, that makes it quite a rare and desirable beastie. And if you're a collector of iconic and historic off-road motorcycles, and somebody at this year's Telford show certainly appeared to like what he saw, because he just bought this bike on the spot, although whether that particular person is going to put the bike back on the track or maybe make it spend the rest of its days as a collector's show bike, I don't actually know. But whoever the buyer was on the day, he's definitely got himself a piece of off-road history, that's for sure. But during the 1980s and the 1990s, the great Austrian engineer Horst Lietner certainly came up with some very innovative bikes and ideas, and his chain torque system was without doubt good enough to name his ATK company soon after he invented that system. But I still think that many of the thousands of dirt bike mad punters who attended the Telford show this year may have missed this bike as they walked around the hallowed Telford halls, because it was quite well tucked away behind a few other machines, and it wasn't very visible. But once again, it's thanks to young Aaron Gledhill at D&G Vintage Restorations for taking the time to dig the bike out so that we could get a very good look at its inner workings and all of its lovely lines. Right, so as promised, we're going to take a closer look at another rare bike from the Telford show in my next video, and this time you can get the full story on this ultra rare C20 twin cam Rotax CCM, a bike that's even rarer than our ATK because this is the only one of its kind. So make sure that you subscribe or retune to CDB TV to get the full story. So until the next time, thanks for watching, and it's goodbye for now.